Welcome to the Indomitable podcast. I'm your host, Di Cerullo, and today we have a very special episode that will leave you inspired. Our guest, Tameka Bazile, is a 6-year brand and social strategist and present head of artist relations and marketing for Timepieces, Time's Web3 initiative. A Brooklyn, a Brooklyn, New York native, Tameka began her journey as a marketer when she began freelancing as a virtual assistant and then social media manager in 2018. Within 2 years, Tameka scaled her business to over 6 figures and helped launch dozens of women-led personal brands, including to over 1 million in revenue for her clients overall. In 2021, Tameka embraced a new challenge when she pivoted into Web3, finding alignment with the space's focus on creator equity, data ownership, and digital innovation. Tameka has been featured in Business Insider, MSNBC, and CNBC as a featured guest on the social media related topics and has been a featured speaker for dozens of digital summits and conferences. She is also a content creator focusing on creator equity in Web3, personal branding, entrepreneurship on LinkedIn, and skincare, lifestyle, and relationships on Instagram. As someone lucky enough to call her a friend, I cannot wait to have this conversation with y'all. Tameka, thank you for joining me today on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. You've
Absolutely.
been such a big part of my transition into corporate and into Web3
Yes.
overall. So I'm super excited for us to be able to connect like this.
God, I can't even read your whole bio. I'm just sitting here like, as I'm reading it, I'm just like, oh my God, yes. Oh my gosh, awesome. That is I'm so proud of you. Okay, before I get too far ahead and like take us off down a topic where like you and I already know each other and everybody else is left in the dust, why don't you talk a little about yourself, what you're up to, what we're doing here, and even how you and I became baddest in tech. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I pivoted into corporate marketing 2 years ago. 2.5 years ago now. It's crazy to think that
Oh my
time has
God.
flown that quickly.
Yes.
After I completely jumped ship from higher ed. So 7 years in higher education, working in student discipline and Title IX predominantly. Eventually, I just became so emotionally drained from a lot of the work that we were doing. A lot of work that is incredibly impactful, especially to students who are impacted by assault on campus or things of that nature. But as a young adult myself, it was definitely starting to get very emotionally heavy.
Right.
And so in the beginning of 2021, after working in higher ed during the COVID, like the height of the COVID pandemic, I jumped ship and I had no money, no plan, no direction. I had my business at the time, which I was circulating about like 3 or 4 clients. So I figured, all right, like I could probably make this work. And then very quickly I realized I hate it here. I hated being a full-time entrepreneur. I hated not having anyone to bounce ideas off of and no one to talk through things with. I hated feeling like I was like a monkey in a sideshow for like money.
Yeah.
As somebody who really loves social media, using social media to kind of maintain my lifestyle started to suck the fun out of it. And I realized that I was just on this like really continuous roller coaster of like, this is not fun. I no longer want to do it for money. This is not fun. I no longer want to do it for money. And as a millennial, I don't know how to do things as a hobby. I don't know how to do things for fun. I don't know how to not monetize everything that I'm good at at all
Yes.
times.
Yes.
So that was like a really difficult place to be in. And so in August of 2021, that was like the first time in years that I had logged into this like long-standing LinkedIn account. In higher ed, we don't really use LinkedIn. It's not a place where you go for jobs or anything of that nature. And at that point, I was just completely fed up with like all the people on LinkedIn who were like, oh my God, I got this new like X amount of money job. Look at me.
Yes.
And I was like, this is actually not the best social media site to be on. Especially when you are in the process of like questioning your life and your sanity.
Absolutely.
So I got on LinkedIn and I was like, all right, let me update this and see what opportunities might be out there that I might want to pivot in. I might want to pivot into corporate marketing. And that is when I came across the most succinctly written position description written by one Di Cerullo. And that's when I was like, and I will say this time and time again, how a position description is written says a lot about the culture of a company.
Right.
And I have seen position descriptions written where it is very much focused on what you can do for the company and not necessarily how you show up for that company or for that
Right.
brand.
Right.
And this one was twofold, right? And I was like, I have to apply, even if it is just off of the principle of this position description is not only looking for somebody who is a good marketer, but somebody who is aware of their surroundings, somebody who knows what they bring to the table, somebody who understands how identity kind of leads into these roles and how you take up space in a company. And that is how I ended up at Jam. And that's how I ended up knowing you.
Yes.
And it has been a really, really amazing 2.5 years being able to learn from you and hear your story, knowing that I would not be where I am in my career if it was not for how intentional you were around how you treated people and how you recruited and how you showed up at Jam. So,
I really appreciate I was not expecting all that. I thought you were just gonna be like, "Oh, well, we worked together at this tech company and we were awesome." And I was gonna be like, "Yeah, man, definitely. I loved that." Um, yeah, no, so yes, how we hire, how we hire matters so much to our companies. And ultimately the success of companies is very much it starts with the job description, like you say. So it really mattered to me when I wrote job descriptions for people that people could see themselves in them.
mm,
I wanted people to be like, this.
mm,
This is the and you know, I had all the arguments for why we should use AI, why we should, oh, we'll hit more people. And I'm like, you don't have to hit more people. You have to hit the person. Like,
yes.
you have to hit the person that's for you.
Yep.
Making a general request will do nothing but flood your inboxes with
Oh,
people
yes.
that are just casually applying to things.
Yep.
So, while
Yep.
that's not what any of what I do now is about, it just, I like to live with that kind of intentionality. I need to know that everything that I do, even if I'm recruiting, even if I'm creating a job description, even if I'm whatevering, is done the way I would do it. Do you
Mm,
know what I mean? Like, I never really take myself out of the equation. And honestly, that's probably the thing that has set me up for failure at times because I always assume that people are exactly who they say they are
mhm.
because I'm who I say I
Yep.
am, right? And that has definitely hit me a few times. I mean, especially in tech, where
Oh,
everybody wants to be the person that they say they are. And
yep.
some of us actually are and are
Yep.
here as kind of like a refuge, right? Like to be ourselves,
Yep.
finally, to be our whole selves. And other people are here to sort of, let's say, not do that. And
Yep. Oh,
it's always
yes.
been it's always been the thing that I trip over the hardest. It's always been the
Oh,
boundary I trip
yes.
over the hardest because I
Everyone
remember, yeah,
everyone
no,
is
I
very
remember
big
when,
on authenticity and showing up
yes,
as your full self until you get the full self of someone that doesn't necessarily fit what your comfort zone is.
absolutely.
And then
Yeah,
it's like, oh, okay, no, this is taking
yeah.
up more space than I would like to
Mo
allocate it.
Right, right, right. I always felt like the more space that I took up, the more space that other people would feel comfortable taking up. Like if I'm the loudest, most ridiculous person in the room, then regardless of how loud you are, you're
Yep.
always less loud than me. You're always like,
Yep.
"Oh, that girl, she's what I," you know what I mean? Like I always felt like the more the louder I was, the brighter I was, the more sparkly I was, the more myself I was, the
Yep.
more anybody else could be themselves. So
I agree.
I appreciate that because it's not always easy to be ourselves, is it? Like they
Oh,
say,
yeah.
"Oh, bring your whole self to work," but they mean that's not really what they mean all the time, right?
They don't want me to bring my whole self
They
to
don't
work.
want me to bring my whole. They're
They
just
do
like,
not.
that's a lot of nail colors, you know?
That, oh my
It's like,
gosh.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is
Oh my gosh.
a big thing that, especially like with my LinkedIn content that I try to touch on. And this is an area where I have to be very careful because I work for a very well-known legacy brand
Of course.
that has 100 years of 100 years ago people that looked like me weren't anywhere within spitting distance of this brand,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so when I do talk about this, I also take into consideration that there is for people like me this kind of medium place where we are allowed to exist comfortably,
Yes.
and you really have to know your boundaries with that like median, right?
Right.
So I think a lot about like my hair and like, I wear acrylic nails and all of the ways that I feel like I can show up where I feel comfortable with how I'm showing up,
Mhm.
without pushing that boundary too far. Because as much as they champion authenticity, as much as corporate champions authenticity, it is really a line that you have to learn to straddle
Yeah.
appropriately because then you get backlash.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely, you do. How do you find that line? How do you, is it like you run into it or do you see it coming? Like, do you start sort of, and the reason I ask is because for me, I will plant like little tiny like checkers into conversations,
Yep.
just like touch points where I'm like, how you respond to this is going to see how
Yes.
far I take the next thing, right? Like
Yes.
how you respond to me. And then you just sort of gauge, right? So
Yep.
what are some of like your touch points? How do you manage to find where that line
Yeah.
is of safety?
That is a great question. And I love that I'm having this conversation with you, considering that you were such a big part of me pivoting into corporate, because I'm thinking about all of the things that like in that time that I was nervous about, right?
Yeah.
Um, and all of the things that so my fiance has been in corporate since we graduated.
Yeah.
So I know for him what the issues were that he had encountered in corporate a lot of the time. And I knew in comparison to him that I am more of a boundary pusher. So
Yes.
he is my
So
nervous.
easy for them, isn't it? Where they'll just
Yes,
know where
it
it's at and
is.
they just never come out, you know?
Yes, he
Yes.
is very much my nervous Nancy. He is
Yes.
like, a lot more sensitive about those things where I'm a lot more like I'm a tester.
Hmm.
So I think for me, especially in the corporate world, it starts with things like the position description, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But a big thing is also when I talk to people in interviews,
Mm.
um, I will always mention the obvious because it's
Hmm.
important to me to see how you respond to me mentioning the obvious. In interviews, I'll be asked questions about like, like what is tell me about a time where you had an issue with a coworker or a colleague at work and how you handled that or something of that
Hmm.
nature.
Right.
When it comes to questions around like environment or how I engage with colleagues, I will always have an example around my blackness or
Mm.
around my womanness, like always.
Yes. Always.
And that is for me to kind of gauge the response of the interviewer, because if the interviewer is in obvious discomfort, I know that that culture is probably not going to be well receiving to someone who wears that identity on their sleeves, right? And like
Right.
we know, like we know a lot of the time, especially when it comes to cis hetero people, you can look at them and say, I know how you are presenting.
Right.
Um, but there's a nuance to working in a company culture that does not allow you to wear that identity on your sleeve, right?
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be kind of a hushed thing.
Yeah.
And I think it starts then. And if I am forthcoming about how my experiences have led me to where I'm at, and how situational awareness has made me kind of rediscover how to encounter and work with people of certain identities or how to work with my own identity. And I find that an interviewer is kind of taken aback by that response, or uncomfortable with that response, I know that that company culture is probably not going to be a good one for me. Another
Absolutely.
thing as well that I think is really important, especially for people of color overall, is knowing our boundaries with our hair and our I like how we show up, because one thing I can't change is my skin color,
Right.
but culturally hair and nails and like certain things are really culturally tied to like blackness.
Yes.
And I've also had to figure out, okay, like what am I willing to kind of scale down
Yes.
versus what am I willing to show up fully in? Um, so I have never so the last time I had straight hair, I was a teenager.
Right.
After college, that is when the perm trends went away. I
Yeah.
like started over. My hair is fully natural.
Hmm.
Um, and so protective styles, braids,
Yes.
things of that nature, they are
Right.
wholly a part of who I am.
Yes.
And there really is no space for me to show up in any other way.
Right.
So knowing internally what those boundaries were for me was important as well because I need to know where I am 100% drawing the line,
Hmm.
so that I am not in situations where now I have to kind of gauge, oh, well, what are you going to do? They offer you this job. They don't want you to show up this certain way. Like, I will never be in that situation,
No.
because I'm calling it from
Yeah.
like 3 interviews ago
Yeah.
that this is
No.
not going to work out for me.
Yes. Yes.
So I think knowing what's important to you, and especially when it comes to how you show up and knowing what your boundaries are, is important. So that you're not ever in a situation where you have to determine, okay, is this something that I'm going to supersede or what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Um, I remember a few years ago when my fiance was just starting to, and we were young and didn't know anything, and in school,
As
um,
one does.
yes. And he was just starting to interview for his corporate roles. And the question about whether or not he would wear his earrings came up. And these are things as a woman I never have to think about, right? Because like women wear earrings. Like in the back of my mind I was like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
But for him, as a man, like wearing earrings was definitely a thing. So I remember comparing that to kind of like, okay, well, what is your boundary for how you look?
Right.
Where when you show up your best and you
Right.
feel your best and you're doing your best work and you are in your best self,
Right.
how do you look? Do you have your earrings on?
Yes.
Because if that gives you power, then it has to be a boundary that you draw.
Right. And
Um,
so it does.
yeah, like earrings don't give me. I don't think I'm wearing earrings now, right? So like
Yeah.
earrings don't
No,
give
I
me
mean,
power,
I think
right?
most of the time I'm banging them into like my headphones, but like
Yes,
I mean, I would defend his right to wear them to my death. Like, yes,
exactly.
if that's his power, then that's
Yep,
yes. That's a yes.
exactly. And those are just some of the things that, like, yeah, if it's some,
Yeah.
if this, showing up in this way is what makes me feel whole, it makes me feel powerful, it makes me feel like I'm
Yeah.
showing up as my best self.
Yeah.
So this is my boundary. And
Right.
anything else, if it doesn't fall into what makes you feel your best self, then it
Yeah.
might be a part of something that is in your negotiables.
Right.
But that's ultimately how I see it.
Right. I wonder too, so the older I'm getting, I'm 40 now. Everyone, I'm 40 now. I'm in my Golden Girls era. I love it. I wonder if the older that we get too, and I don't mean we just women, but we as people, I wonder if the older we get, the less willing I am to sort of hear about things that other people
Mm,
don't like, also,
mm,
right? Like, I think that
mm.
when I was in my 20s, when I was first getting out of college, when I was doing my first jobs or anything, I think people could actually say something to me like, oh, well, Di, I don't like your earrings. Oh, are you sure you want to do all that? Oh, take out your nose ring, that kind of stuff.
Yep,
And I would have taken that feedback.
yep.
And now today, I could have a tattoo of a bunny rabbit on my forehead, and I would just not be expected. I would be like, I would not be expected to like hear about it from other people, like at
I
all.
agree.
Like,
I completely
I
agree.
feel like, and I don't know if it's me that I have changed, that I am just, I don't have that give me feedback face
Yep,
or what, but
yep.
like these days, you can't tell me anything. Like,
Oh,
you could
yes.
not.
I
Like,
completely
just,
agree. I
I
think,
don't care.
especially as you get older, you start to kind of learn like what advice and feedback uh, you're actually grateful for from other people, right?
Right.
And like what advice and feedback you're actually like, I didn't need that.
Right.
I'm not going to do
Yeah.
anything with that. I'm not gonna, yeah,
Well,
like,
I mean, they say that you shouldn't go to people, you shouldn't take advice from people or you shouldn't take criticism from people you wouldn't go to for advice. And I have like embodied that. I'm just
yes,
like, you're seriously trying to tell me from your mother's
yes.
basement what I should do with my hair. right
Oh,
now
yes.
with your whole chest. That's
Yep.
impressive. That's an
Yeah.
impressive amount of audacity,
Yep.
isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
No, so like I don't think it's that I can't be bothered so much as that I don't put any stock in it, right?
I
Like
agree.
I feel like I'm so grateful to be at this point in my life
Yep.
because I don't agree. I
I
don't
agree. Yep.
agree with
Yep.
like I don't agree with other people having that power, and so
Yeah.
they don't.
I
And I
completely
think that
agree.
that's been one of my favorite things about getting older. Has just been
Oh, yes.
the absolute putting down of, just that bucket of fucks that one gives. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like I
Literally.
absolutely just it she's gone now. That
Yes.
that girl has gone and this one has like cellulite and she loves it.
Yep.
And sometimes at night she eats lots of ice cream and watches cartoons and it's totally fine.
And
You
you're
know,
just
like
happy with who you've become. And I think that that
yes, of
is
course.
a big part of it too. Like I spent so much time growing up trying to figure out who I was,
Right.
um, and trying to also defend who I was in that moment.
So less trying to find who you were,
Yep.
more that you were trying to argue for who you were.
Yes.
And like so you were kind of denying who you were. And I only
Yes.
know that because guess who else? This girl.
Yes.
Same.
You
So
are
like
absolutely right.
we're not even trying to find who we are. We know
Yep.
who we are. We're just trying
Exactly.
to find something adjacent enough to who we are
Yep.
that is acceptable to others,
Oh
right?
yes,
Oof.
absolutely, and that was such a big part of because like no, I I'm first generation American as well,
Yes.
so a
Yes.
lot of that defense was coming from inside the house,
Of
right?
course. Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yes.
so
Yes.
so having to being comfortable in the decisions that I was making in the direction that I was going in and feeling like, all right, this is what my spirit is moving me to do, and then
Yeah.
having people who I know love me
Yes.
say I don't understand why you're doing this. I don't understand what like I mean it's not for you to understand, right? And at a
Right.
certain point
Right.
I needed to be okay with that. I needed to be okay with saying I need to understand.
Right.
And the people who love you don't have to understand to love you
Right. Right.
was
Right.
a really big element. And if I could learn to build up that wall
Yeah.
between myself and my family and my
Yeah.
friends and the people who are consistently in my sphere, I 100% guarantee you that Bob from HR is not going to make me change my hairstyle.
Absolutely.
So, so
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. How did you give up? And I don't know if you have. How did you give up that needing to defend yourself to others? Did you outgrow it, or do you remember? Like, was there a moment in time where you just like, aha, that's the last one?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's definitely still something that I internally struggle with. I think
Yeah.
that there are always going to be certain things that, like, in my head, I have to
Mm-hmm.
call myself out on my own shit, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Because I do struggle with feeling, I do struggle with what I would consider making people love me,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Rejection sensitivity.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. That's
Yep.
the exact word for
That's the
it.
exact word.
I have a lot of rejection sensitivity, right? And
Absolutely.
it causes me to show up in ways that I think that people want me to show up as.
Yeah.
Um, and I constantly in my head have to say or tell myself, oh, like you don't want to do that shit.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Don't
You
do it.
don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And also recognizing that like the people who love me are gonna love me regardless, and that it's
Right.
not like you don't have to do that anymore, right? Like
Right.
I'm 30 now.
Yeah.
Like I my hope is that my 30s are my best years because I can tell you my 20s were absolute trash.
That's yeah.
Right?
Before,
Like
I don't know why people are so focused on them. They're absolute trash.
oh my God,
Yep.
I spent your 20s are a time for you to be in therapy throughout the entire decade. Okay?
Yes.
Consistently. Do not leave the
Yes.
therapist office because
No. Yes.
it is all
Yes.
you've got.
Yes.
And so for me, like where I am now, like knowing that, okay, like my partner has chosen to love me. So there's
Right.
nothing that I'm not performing for his love,
Right.
right?
Right.
My parents, I don't have to perform for their love.
Right.
Um, And these are a lot of things that were ingrained in me like
Of
very
course.
young, because I,
Yes.
as a young child, I wanted freedom and I wanted acceptance, and I thought that that would only come with me being who you wanted me to be.
Right.
And I realized now that conflict is a big part of still being who you
Yes.
love.
Yes.
So yes, I
Yes.
still definitely need to call myself out on my stuff and say like, oh, okay, you
Yeah.
said yes to that, but you actually need to backtrack now, which is even worse in a lot of ways. But you actually need to backtrack now because you didn't want to say yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm
But
excited for you to be
also,
40 then.
oh my gosh, yes.
Just start with no. Like, I'm
Oh my,
like,
yeah, I can't
walk
wait
me
until
into
I
yes.
get to the point
Like,
where I'm just like, oh shit, like the answer to that is no. But I
yeah.
appreciate you asking
Yeah.
me, right?
Yeah. Ask me next time, but
Oh
I'm
my
also probably
goodness.
going to say no then too.
Or
But keep
even,
asking. Yeah.
oh my gosh, or even a big thing at work that I started doing is being honest about things that give me anxiety, or
Yes.
being honest about things that like I responded
Yes.
that way because of XYZ, and that's,
Yes.
I'm working on that, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think that empowers other people to be like, because I'm not going to apologize for having anxiety.
No. Right.
Like we
Right.
live in
I'm
a
not going to be able to
capitalist
stop it. I've tried to
patriarchal,
stop it. Yes.
yes, like a lot of things about this society give me
Yes.
anxiety.
Look, I'm
Okay.
not creating the rest of the world
Yes,
here. Yes.
yes. But
Yes.
I will take responsibility for how my anxiety may have led me to misinform you or mislead
Yeah.
you.
Right. Right.
And so that is something that I've started to be honest about. I recently got a new supervisor at work, and we're kind of figuring out like our cadence with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I recently had a conversation with him where I was completely spiraling. And at the end of the conversation, I was like, I 100% want you to know that I recognize that this conversation was brought on by an anxiety riddled spiral. This is where it came from. I know this to be true. I
Yeah.
am working on this for next time.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. I think it's important for people who have mental health issues, people who are
Yes.
neurodivergent,
Yes.
people just who are from all walks of life to be
Yes.
honest about the realities of like, we don't come to work as like completely different people than who we are in our day-to-day lives. Like my
Right.
anxiety isn't left at the door when
Oh,
I come into the office.
yes.
Like, it's actually like 3 times the
It's
amount that it
three
is
times
once
the
I'm
amount
in.
because I've left my house.
Yes, yes. So yeah, so really being able to be honest about that and know what I'm working on and know that I'm imperfect in that way. My hope is that one, it allows people to understand me more. And two, it allows other people to allow themselves to be seen, because I think a big part of who I am as a person is also empowering other people to let themselves be seen. So
Yeah. So you holding the lantern up for yourself is helping other people have brighter
yes,
experiences as well. Absolutely.
yeah, yep.
How would you, I mean, ideally, if we were to say that this wasn't a specific person or a specific manager, what would have been like his ideal response? What would have been like,
That's a
what
great
could he have said
question.
in that moment to just be like, bed? Like, you know?
Yeah, that is a really great question. I think the ideal response, no matter what, is understanding. Like,
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
so like, yeah, like as a supervisor, really being like, okay, like now that I know that this is something that happens to you,
Mm-hmm.
um, what are ways that I can help decrease that
Yes,
anxiety, right?
yes,
So
yes,
one thing that I have, and I bring all my shit to the table. So like when
absolutely.
I am very much a manage up kind of person.
Mhm, mhm,
So
mhm, same.
um, one of the first few meetings that I had with my supervisor was like, okay, like how do we do feedback? How often are we going to be talking to each other? How often do you want to do
Yes,
one-on-ones? Like what are we doing here?
right.
And one thing that we talked about is like if there's a need for you to put a meeting on my calendar randomly, I need
Mhm,
you to put in the description what that meeting is about. Like I can't have
right,
you just like one on
right,
one with Tameka, because in my head
right,
you're
and
firing.
HR.
And now, yes, and like, and now I spent the last 6 hours of the day. Like this meeting is at
Right,
3 o'clock. I just spent the last
yes,
6 hours trying to figure out what I fucked up.
yeah.
When in reality,
The whole day
you
was trash. Yes,
like, and
yes,
that could have been avoided, right?
yes, absolutely.
So just things like that. I think as a manager, it is your responsibility to learn how to manage the people that you're actually managing. Like there is no one size fits all managerial like strategy.
Yes.
It really depends on you being able to humanize and see the people that you are working with. And I think one of those biggest elements is, okay, so what can I change or what can I do? Of course, within reason, right? To help you manage this. And I think overall, people will find that those adjustments are adjustments that everybody needs across the board, not just people with anxiety or anything. Like, I don't think you should be
Yes.
throwing meetings on anyone's calendar without context,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes.
Anytime I have that question, but from a, like a neurodiversity perspective, people will be like, "Oh, well, how can we help the neurodiverse?" I'm like, everything else that you're doing for people with anxiety, people with like all
Yes.
of those things are
Yep.
already things that help all of us. So
Yes.
like get right with the fact that people are different and
Oh, yes.
the more inclusive you can be, the better. You've hit everybody. It doesn't
Agreed.
need to be box checking, you know?
Oh, yes. Absolutely
Mm.
agreed.
Oh gosh, I know. Same. Yep, I am also an anxiety person. I am also a rejection sensitivity, just
Yep.
sensitivity. We say disorder.
Yep.
But yeah, no, absolutely the same. Trauma born
Yep.
all the way down. All of,
Yep.
this podcast is based on my trauma book, right? Like, so I think everybody that manages to listen to this knows quite a bit about trauma and anxiety.
It is.
Yeah.
It is one of ironically, it's funny because I did a LinkedIn post about this today. It's
Hmm.
ironically one of the things that we talk about too much, but also not enough, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Yes.
it's
We talk
especially
about
like
it
with
and
social
never
media.
talk about it. Yes.
Like, and
Yes.
it's kind of like what we're talking about is kind of like the surface level stuff.
Yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
nobody ever goes in too deep because
Yes.
then you start to get into that like area of discomfort where people are like, oh no, like I
Yes.
don't really want people to know me that well.
Yes. And it feels
Right?
weird to me because of
Yep.
the fact that like I've had to do so much therapy, obviously, and so much self-work. So
Yep.
I will see like these posts that'll say like, and I am not hating on it, but I will see these posts that'll be like, oh, this yoga move for releasing trauma. And I'm just
Oh
sitting
my
there
God.
like,
Hit this pressure point and you'll start crying and let release
Like,
things
what
immediately.
are you talking about?
Yep.
Like, what about the
Yes.
people who actually have real shit?
Yep.
What
Oh
if they
yes.
get down into that move, nothing happens, and then they
Yep.
feel like they're broken and
Yes.
that there's no help for them
Yep.
because people are so casual
Yep.
about mental health
Yes.
because they have no idea how deep
Agreed.
the hole can go. So
Agreed.
it's so profound to me
Yep.
that we are talking so casually about surface level things
Oh
and
yes.
being completely out of our depth when it
Oh
comes
yes.
to discussing the things that are real. And
Yep.
it leaves so many people in its wake, and it
Oh
leaves so
yes.
many of us out in the cold, out on the outside, and feeling like we are aliens. So
Oh
it's
yes.
I am so over this like wellness industry and this
Um,
whole like I can't, because
oh
it
my
drives me
goodness.
crazy, because if it makes me feel like an alien, guys,
Yep.
like come on, who's this for?
It
Who's
is
this
a
for?
huge thing
Honestly.
on social media. So it's funny because today's post of mine was about just the repercussions of being chronically online.
Yes.
And as much information, I love being online, right?
Yes.
I love social media. I love all of the accessibility it has afforded us. But at the same time, we also need to recognize that social media, for many people, is
Yeah.
their source for everything.
Everything.
And that in and of itself is problematic as well, right? So now we have selfish people being called narcissists, right?
Yes. Right.
And selfishness in and of itself is a quality that all people have,
Yes.
not just like narcissism is not a quality that all people have.
No, it is not.
And like we are no longer delineating a lot of these like terminologies or a lot
Yeah.
of these realities, and we're
Right.
starting to make people who aren't narcissists feel badly for prioritizing themselves. People who have selfish tendencies feeling like I can't ask for what I need. People
Right.
who are narcissists feeling like, oh shit, like now I understand enough of what I'm experiencing to be able to self-diagnose and figure it out myself. Like, no, everybody needs to go to therapy. All
Yes.
three of you. All three of you.
Every narcissist, go to therapy. You know a
Yes, it
narcissist,
is
go to therapy.
definitely a thing. But it
Yes.
just today's chronically online post is definitely a big indication that we are starting to kind of blur that line between who we are as people and who we are online.
Yes.
And it's becoming detrimental in a lot of
Right.
ways.
I mean, I see us using, what's chronically called therapy speak, right, in our workforces, but we're using it in such a way that it's still, what do I mean? I want to say attacky almost, but like
Hmm.
it's intended to hurt and
Yes.
harm,
Yep.
and yet we're using that language of therapy, that
Yep.
language of healing, that
Yep.
language of support. And I'm always so fascinated to see how people use it, because then you see them doing harm with
Yep.
language that's supposed to heal.
Yes.
And in those moments, that's not even just like a red flag. That's like the whole building is red. Like
Yes.
the whole, like the whole thing. Like
Yes.
I will see people, you know, I don't want to be just like billionaires. I will see people who are just like hoarding resources, like
Yes.
taking all the money from their employees, telling
Yep.
people they can't afford to hire,
Yep.
doing all of these things, and then using like therapy speak to
Yep.
get people on board about it. And you're
Oh,
like,
yes. Yep. We see it
what?
in a lot of intellectual conversation as well, like especially I
Right.
spent years on higher ed, like in higher ed and in
Yes.
seminars and classes.
Yes.
And one thing that students have learned to do is to intellectualize their racism or intellectualize their
Yes.
sexism. And because it
Yes.
sounds smart, you completely lose yourself in the explanation. And then when
Right.
you get to the conclusion, you realize that, oh, you're describing genocide. You are
Yes.
describing eugenics. You are
Right.
describing really problematic
Right.
ideals, but
Right.
intellectualizing them so people only see how smart you come off.
People only see the argument. Why can't we have the argument die? You know what I mean?
Like,
Like, all the time. Nope, I have that conversation all the time
it's a
where I will
thing.
be like, okay, well, it sounds like you're describing this particular thing
Yes.
that's actually
Yes.
heinous, and we have grown past it as humanity.
Sometimes we need
And
to
they'll
be
be like,
like,
no,
in
no, no.
layman's terms, you are
Yeah,
saying to kill
you
all
are
the black
saying
people.
this is racism. Yeah, this
Yes.
right here, super harmful, and you
Yep.
should stop talking about it and go to
Yes.
therapy.
The
But
layman's
no,
term
I,
still
I mean,
matters.
right, and you absolutely get lost in the where ordinarily you wouldn't even have the argument, right?
Yep.
Ordinarily you wouldn't have
Yes.
the argument, but you get other people in that sort of academic situation or at work or anything like that, and people will be like, well, wasn't Josh just saying that, like,
Yep.
wasn't it just this? And it's
Yep.
like, not at all. And then you look
Yep.
like the crazy person who,
Oh, yes.
who sees racism everywhere, who has
Everywhere. Yep.
classes just explaining that he just
Yep.
doesn't like long nails. It's
Oh,
just
yes.
a compliment. You know what I mean? And I'll just be sitting there
Like,
like, do I even bother with the argument? Or
yeah.
am I grown enough that, like, like, you kind of got, I don't want to say you, I want to say me. I feel like I used to need to die on every hill to keep people safe. Now adult die wonders if dying on every hill even does anything.
Oh,
And
yeah.
like, it's like, do I maintain my peace, or do I, it's
Yep.
situational because I'm in
Oh, yeah.
progress. It's situational.
You are absolutely correct. And this is something that I don't think I will ever really know how to move.
Yes.
But especially as I have started creating more content, showing up more online,
Yes.
and with everything that's happening like in the world,
Yes.
the actualization around like, what are your thoughts on insert political issue here? Right.
Yes. Right.
And I have thoughts.
Of course.
I am
Right.
a living
Human
being.
being in this
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
But also recognizing that I have a responsibility with the platform that I am growing to also not weaponize my audience against each other, not put people in positions where they are operating off of what I am saying or the thoughts and opinions that I am putting out. It's really difficult to kind of draw that line as a creator or
Right.
somebody who is trying to become an influencer to understand the depth of your influence,
Right.
because your opinions are no longer opinions anymore.
No.
Like people are now taking your opinions to heart. They are seeing you as a representation of themselves. They are seeing you as an extension of who they are. And I think that too often influencers forget that like your audience is not just the hee hee, like I have 1 million followers. Like this is
Yeah.
no longer cute. This is
Right.
no longer like these are in it 10, 20 years ago, somebody who could fill up a room with 1 million people was a celebrity. Or yeah, even on a smaller scale, I think about like cult leaders, right? Like
Yes.
these were things that we were actively taught to fear, because one person who can indoctrinate such a large group of people could create really problematic like experiences.
Right.
And I think now, because of how social media operates, like followers are no longer like seen as real tangible people whose lives you are touching every day. And
Yeah.
that is a really big sore spot for me as somebody who loves social media.
Yeah.
And recently it's become like such a really big part of how I show up and whether I even do show up or not.
Yeah.
Because I also don't want to mean too much to people.
Yes. You know,
And that's been a big
yeah.
thing too.
Yeah. You know what I've noticed, and this is, this might just be me. I have noticed that people decide ahead of time what they think of you, right? I've
Mm.
noticed that it doesn't matter what I say necessarily or how I intend it. If somebody already has decided that I have offended them or before I've
Yep.
spoken, that my existence offends them,
Yep.
then they will find fault with what I have said.
Oh, yes.
If they're the type of people that already like me or
Yep.
like people like me or want to be known to like people like me, which is the case for me now that people know that I was lived in foster care and grew up the way I
Hmm.
grew up, those people will try harder to understand what I
Yep.
meant, right?
Yep.
Than people who have already decided that they want to, dismiss me. So if they
Yep.
want to dismiss me, they will use all manner of argument. I have
Yes.
seen the, the callous to the very well thought out and, explainers
Full
on why I'm
dissertation.
right, exactly. The full dissertation on how I am completely wrong. And it's just like, I was talking, so I had this experience where I posted on LinkedIn and I was just saying how important it was when we talk to each other, when we're interviewing each other, when there is a situation where somebody is undervaluing themselves, that you should tell them.
Mm.
I said this online, and I think I even said, especially women. And I like put the little plus sign at the end of women to make sure everybody knew that I meant everybody. Especially does not mean exclusively, it just means especially, right?
Oh,
Just
yes.
because it's statistics.
Yep.
I had, oh my God, men were outraged.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, of
they
course.
were outraged. I had men be like, oh, well, I guess don't get an anthropology degree and expect to be smart. I had people be like, I had people share the post and say like, sexism as it at its finest. And I was just
Yep.
sitting there like, because of all the sharing and the posting, like 6 million people on LinkedIn saw it. And I sat there stunned thinking like, if I said this to somebody interpersonally, they would
Yep.
be like, oh, obviously die.
Yep.
But because
Mhm.
I shared it on LinkedIn or shared it on social media, it caught fire and
Yep.
it had nothing to do with me.
Yep.
But people wanted to make attacks
Yep.
against me that were specifically about me, which I was
Yep.
so fascinated by, right?
That
So,
is another archetype of people who are chronically online.
right.
And today I talk about 4 or 5 archetypes today. Um, and so like I mean, everyone who's a creator, everyone who posts, when you speak, you're pretty much talking to a specific demographic of people, like a
Right.
specific, like, the people who this is going to resonate with.
Right.
But I think over time we're starting to realize that when it comes to things like reach, when it comes to things like your audience is no longer just the people who follow you anymore. Now social media platforms are trying to disseminate your content as far and as wide as possible,
Right.
because their goal is to keep people on the platform. So whether you are getting dissenting opinions or not, you are keeping people on their platform.
Yes.
And so what aboutism and what if, and it is a really big part of that chronically online culture, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's the idea that I could say, so there's something currently happening on TikTok right now. This girl made bean soup. It was like a whole big thing. Someone commented, well, what if I don't eat beans? Like, what am I supposed to substitute this with? And she pretty much was like, then don't make the bean soup. Like, and whataboutism is definitely a big element. And it's something that we actually don't practice in our day to day, like
Right.
regular interactions with people.
No.
Like, we as human beings are like, we already understand that, like, creating like ongoing dialogue around very specific nuances does not serve us in a regular day to day.
Right.
But because we no longer see users and followers and as people anymore,
Right.
um, whataboutism literally only exists as much as it does in the online space, because that can go on forever. Because I mean,
Forever.
realistically, the notification is going to be in your notifications until you decide to check it. Your post goes viral. It's going to go
Mhm.
viral for days, right? There's nothing you
Yeah.
can do about it. You
Nope.
can't stop it unless you delete it. And then even by that time, because the way the internet works, it's screenshotted, it's shared, it's on a different
Right.
platform now. Like,
Yep.
I have posted things that like my fiance has sent me, and he was like, I saw this on Instagram, and I was like, I don't even know how that got there, but
Yeah.
well, there I am, my face
There
next
I
to my
am.
like,
There I am. Being
and that's
misquoted.
definitely a thing. So it's not that people don't understand your nuance. It's not that people
Yeah.
don't understand what you were
Yeah.
trying to say.
Yep.
It's just that when people see content, they consider it directly to them. You are speaking directly to me. Like, we no longer see things in the sense of like a million people are seeing this one post and maybe Di is not talking to me.
No.
It showed up on my feed, which means it is for me, which is a problem
Right.
with things like the For You page.
Right. Right.
And therefore, I need to respond from my point of view about why this either fits me or it doesn't fit me specifically,
Right.
which is another big issue too, which is hyper individualism,
Mhm.
which is another thing that is growing online as
Yes.
well.
Of course.
We are no longer a collectivist society. We're no longer community based. Everyone
Yeah.
is really in it for themselves. And if it's something that doesn't affect you, you ignore it.
Yes.
And if it's something that does affect you, you're up in arms about it. And
Absolutely.
there really is no middle ground. But it's not that they didn't understand your point. They absolutely
No.
understood your point. And if you would have
Right.
said that on stage as a speaker in a
Mm-hmm.
different capacity, you would
Yep.
have gotten claps and praises, and afterwards people would have been like, wow, you really made some great points.
Yes.
And
Yeah. No.
you would have went on with your life.
Yep.
But yeah, people want
No.
to argue online. People want to feel like everything that they are ingesting online is either about them or it's not, because it's coming directly to their phones, when
Yeah.
that's just not how that works.
Absolutely. And in those circumstances, what somebody responds to me has more to do with them than it does me at
Yes.
all. Right? Like,
And
oh,
that is a beautiful thing to
yeah.
understand as
Right?
somebody who posts on the
Absolutely.
internet. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I would have this go on forever, but we're absolutely like going to run out of our lives here. All right. Okay. So I know I'd love this to go on forever. We have to let this incredible human get back to her actual life and the work she's doing out in the world. Tameka, tell everyone how they can follow you and keep up with what you're doing.
Yeah, so everyone can follow me at Tameka Bazile on every platform. But
Mm-hmm.
predominantly I'm active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So find me there. And I love
Yeah.
having a lot of these similar conversations online. My goal overall is, one, to make people feel seen, but two, I am very much an educator around the raw and real realities of social media and not just the foundational elements. So, how is social media bleeding into our everyday society? The people who make social media what it is, and really giving people a glimpse into what it takes to actually make social media what it is today. So, find me there and we'll have those
Yes.
conversations.
Yes, my friend, thank you so much for letting us share in your laughter and your spirit
Thank
today.
you.
Your zest for life is absolutely contagious, and that's what I want folks to take away who managed to listen to this today. So, folks, I hope this conversation has inspired you to join Tameka in making space for others and to give voice to everyone that you meet. because that's what she's doing out in the world, and she's an incredible human being. So make sure you follow her. And if you are the type of person who books speakers, book this person. She is amazing. So thank you for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the Indomitable podcast for more uplifting stories of triumph. On the docket this month, we'll continue talking to some of indomitable friends of mine personally, including a Ukrainian refugee who I met through work, but later changed my life and became part of our family. I'm so happy to have you here in our community, and remember, together we are truly indomitable. Take care, y'all.